Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Quick reminder, support the podcast. Best way you can do that is by becoming a paid subscriber on the Substack. And you know, the usual, donate, you can consult, check out my affiliates. But you know, there is a new development. I have started Geopolitics and Empire en Español, in Spanish, where I'm speaking Spanish with only Spanish-speaking experts. That's a separate channel, and you can check that out through the website. And I have miraculously figured out a free way to add English subtitles. So even if you don't speak Spanish, you can view the video and check out the English subtitles to get different views from beyond the English-speaking world. Returning to the podcast, it's been a while, I think a little under a year, is Hügo Krüger. He's a writer, civil engineer, podcast host, and energy analyst. Welcome back, Hügo.
Thank you, Thorvald. Thanks for having me back on the show.
A lot is going on, but before maybe getting into some of the stuff, I thought maybe in passing we could just mention, in passing, pun not intended, the passing of Francis Boyle. You posted a clip. He did that insane big interview with me 5 years ago, and then subsequently we discussed with Francis the Middle East, Iran, and stuff like that. Just any thoughts on Francis Boyle?
Yeah, it's quite a sad one to me. I think Francis Boyle is not appreciated yet as a public intellectual, and maybe the ways I think all public intellectuals today are sort of been gatekept by Noam Chomsky to some extent, and there are other critics that are much better, and he's one of them. And I would say the man has a long shadow. We can get into this later, but one of the reasons South Africa is not the only reason, but one of the motivations that South Africa went to the International Court of Justice is because of Francis Boyle's influence. Notably, our foreign minister, Naledi Pandor, reacted to his letter, arguing that you can make a case for genocide. And so, the man has a long shadow, and we'll see how it works out.
Yeah, and I try to find people like that. I've interviewed a number of such folks, in my opinion, on the podcast. Johan Galtung, and who's passed, and other folks like that. People who a lot of listeners don't understand the weight that some of these people have, the background that they've had, and it's not today people are used to sort of the easy the candy alt media, all these people that are hyped up, and the really smart people. They don't do social media, and you don't know who they are. But South Africa, so a lot is going on. You're South African, and you wrote on your Substack a piece on understanding Trump's attack on South Africa. People should subscribe to Hügo's Substack. The link is in the description. But what's going on with South Africa and the U.S.?
It's actually interesting. I always ask Americans if they know anything about South Africa, and it always gives me an idea if our media is amplifying the radar of the US, because the US is a lot of places, and South Africa is not a big economy. We're a mid-sized, smaller economy. We're the size of Maryland, 1/50 of the US state in GDP, things of that nature. But as everyone, who's been following these issues closely on Israel in particular, South Africa confronted Israel, the International Court of Justice, by the advice of Francis Boyle and a few others, alleging genocide, which I think is at that time I was still a bit about the definition, and I think now it's been kind of obvious to me that's occurred. And because of this, the United States is threatening South Africa in several ways. Notably, it's threatening South Africa through sanctions. It's threatening to kick us out of AGOA, which is the African Growth and Opportunities Act, which is a free trade agreement between South Africa and the United States. Obviously, we are set to lose a little bit more. Things of that nature is happening. Elon Musk is within the White House. And what seems to be happening is that Elon Musk and a few South Africans around Trump, which happen to be white South Africans, and I'll explain this important distinction later, is almost like a weaponized diaspora against the government at home. Okay. So you have Elon Musk threatening Cyril Ramaphosa, our president, who is the president of the African National Congress. Ramaphosa, for what it's worth, it's important to mention, it was one of the negotiators on behalf of Nelson Mandela against the apartheid government. He's now president. Okay. So he's a very senior figure within the ANC. I don't happen to like the ANC's politics a lot, but as sanctions always happen, when it happened in Zimbabwe, I saw this, and in Iran, where my wife is from, when countries' leaders are being sanctioned, they turn their back against whoever sanctioned and become hardened. And we're seeing in South Africa these arguments for sovereignty. Who the hell are you to tell me? Elon Musk left the country. And you can see this white-black thing that has always been dormant. I mean, South Africa's race relations is good. Don't get me kidding. We love each other. But it is always a way to instigate tensions and stuff. We can see these arguments being made somewhat in our media. And so this is like we are in the geopolitical, vice of the United States. But, as I say, when I speak to Americans, they're not always aware of this. So my question is, to what extent is our media amplifying it? And to what extent is the American media just ignoring it? And the truth is somewhere between the two, right?
So there's a few questions I have here. You mentioned South Africa's position on Israel. Is there, beyond that, anything else that Washington wants, other agendas, to punch a hole in BRICS?
BRICS is part of it. Some people have been alleging that, although the BRICS issue, in my view, is exaggerated because BRICS countries, most of them still trade with the United States. South Africa's second largest trading partner is the United States. The biggest one is China, right? So BRICS is sort of like, as some people say, it's just another trilateral commission or just another one of these structures being imposed. And don't fall for the propaganda. It's just a multinational agreement, okay? But what Trump is alleging is interesting. So the South African government is passing a very unpopular law, especially among white South Africans, called it's a Land Reform Act. Now, the United States saying that that South Africa is discriminating against white farmers and that there is racism and stuff. Now, South Africa does have very bad affirmative action laws. And these things, I mean, as a white South African, I've always felt a little bit discriminated against, to be honest with you. I don't believe there's genocide. However, white farmers have been killed in South Africa, but all the statistics and analysis I've seen shows that this is part of a wider trend of violence and crime. South Africa is as violent as Mexico. Okay, so you'd expect there to be farmers killed every time and then. But the challenge is this. Historically speaking, in South Africa, so I think it was 10 or 12, there was a Land Act passed before the apartheid years, during the British colonial times, that allocated 80% of all land in the country to the white population. And they created reserves to the black populations, which were comparable to Indian reserves. But as time went on, you had the apartheid government, and there's a long history playing in. So 1994, Mandela comes to power. There's a disparity in land ownership. Okay. And it happened to be that the white population controls that time 70-80% of agricultural land. Very important to cite that because it's not the total surface area of the country. So again, you're seeing this play with numbers like in COVID. They're not precising what they're saying because agricultural land is something like 20-30% of the whole country. Okay. So in other words, yes, there is a land issue. There's a land conflict. Nobody's denying that. It's the white population has not been opposed necessarily to land reform, but we don't want the agriculture to collapse necessarily. So you can't just give it to government cronies like in Zimbabwe or kill the farmers like Zimbabwe did. And then what happens? Your agriculture collapses, your economy collapses, right? So the government has set targets to 30% black ownership by 2030. And they've had certain reform acts in place to give what they call willing buyer, willing seller principles. And the problem is the government has never adequately transferred some of the land. Some of the land remained underdeveloped. And I do think there was a lack of knowledge of skills transfer when you simply just have agrarian reforms like that. So there's real pragmatic obstacles to implementing the land reform that I would say there isn't major public opposition against as long as it's properly done. Donald Trump comes in, he says discrimination against white farmers. So no context given to the conflict, the history. And I say this as somebody whose family has been killed with some of those farms. I know people there, okay? But he's not giving any context to the history and the conflict. It's just South Africa is discriminating against white farmers, and he wants to give Afrikaners, like me, okay, asylum to the United States. Now, I would like to go to have refugee status in the US. Here's the problem. My wife's from Iran, and one of the reasons cited is South Africa's relations with Iran. So because of my marriage, I can't go to the United States. Okay, well, I can, but I have to leave my wife alone. We're still not going to go. But, I don't believe I need refugee status, for example. And then obviously within South Africa, you have opportunists. There's civil rights groups like a group called AfriForum exploiting the situation, saying that, this is the Afrikaner farmers, and now we want to use this for leverage with the inside of the country because it's a country of conflict, right? You have to manage these conflicts. And then you have the ANC saying there's no farm issue, as if they're pretending no farmers have been killed. So even Ramaphosa and them are lying. So there's a lot of this type of politics of hypocrisy going around. But it's like South Africa, the United States is now adequately intervening in the internal affairs of South Africa. And I see it as our own internal divisions, which have always been there, which will always be there, in my view, is now being amplified through the propaganda matrix.
I want to go back to what you mentioned, the PayPal Mafia. For the life of me, in the past week or two, I watched a wonderful video. I can't remember who it was, who specifically pointed out how it was strange that a lot of this PayPal mafia originates from South Africa. David Sachs, I didn't know David Sachs was from, or he spent time in South Africa, that Peter Thiel spent time as a young person in
Peter Thiel is an interesting character here. He lived in Johannesburg with his parents. His parents then moved to Southwest Africa, which was then a colony of South Africa. It's actually a protectorate handed over after the League of Nations mandate. And because apartheid was not only in South Africa, it was South Africa and Namibia. People tend to forget Namibia. Okay. And Peter Thiel lived in Lüderitz. In Lüderitz until 1996, they still greeted each other with Heil Hitler. It was the last place on earth where Heil Hitler was said. That's Peter Thiel, who is currently, and I'm saying this here, selling equipment for artificial intelligence so the Israelis can use on the Palestinians. It sounds as if Lüderitz kind of gave him a good education. Okay. So he's always been a dodgy character, and he sits at the Hoover Institute, for example. Elon Musk, I don't know what his position on South Africa is, because a friend of mine had an interview with his father recently to see Worldview. And his father is, I would say, he represents the opinions of very old white South Africans. He's got a little bit of apartheid ideology still into him, but you can see he's moved on from a lot of those things. So it's as long as if his father's influence is there, you can see they've compromised and accepted the black population as equals, but there's still some latent weird ideological stuff left in him. I don't know what Musk's position is. It's never been clear to me if he even cared about South Africa, because when I was at university, some people approached him to come talk to us, and he didn't even bother to respond. You'd think he would be an inspiration for South Africans. David Sachs is also Jewish South African, and South Africa has its own local Jewish community. It's one of the, I think it's the 10th or 11th largest Jewish community in the world, and they have obviously reacted because of the Israeli issue. But they are now starting to talk about a South African lobby, in addition to the Israeli lobby. And if you look at the PayPal Mafia, another character in the PayPal Mafia is a man by the name of Roelof Botha. Now, Roelof Botha's grandfather was the foreign minister for the apartheid government. Okay. So, yeah, this is what it is. Now, whether they still hold the convictions of their parents or their grandparents, I'm very skeptical, because I don't hold those of my parents and my grandparents, for example. So, they say don't make everything a black and white racist thing. However, what happened after 1994, when Mandela's government came in, is the government systematically started implementing affirmative action laws, pro-black economic empowerment laws. This was the first version of DEI, in my view, where you classify everyone according to race, which is an idiotic way of solving inequalities within a country. And it kicked a lot of very skilled white people out of the civil servants. And many of them had to immigrate. Now, you can imagine, everyone talked about the Rainbow Nation in South Africa, and you were a victim in a certain sense of redress. If they had to help the black population, and you were just a casualty along the way. That's how it was sold. Okay. Those people have immigrated. Now, if you look at the income, and I put this in my article, of South Africans in the United States, it's higher than Asians. And that is not skewed by Musk's wealth. Median income of South Africans is very successful. I don't entirely know why. I suspect it's because we're a minority Western population in African countries, so we understand how to play both systems. And Musk is very good at doing this. Okay, and if you look at South Africans in Australia and in the UK, and most of them happen to be white, tend to be highly successful individuals, but they carry a bit of resentment to their country for the way they were treated by the post-apartheid government. And now you can imagine with the Israeli issue, this is a powder cake that's waiting to go on. And this explains the Musk Ramaphosa anger, in my view. It's dangerous also because if the South African government was clever, you would not alienate your own population as well, right? It's like the Iranian diaspora. They have legitimate reasons to be angry. But what I'm saying to South Africans is take a step back at this, take a deep breath, whatever your view on the government, whatever it might be, and accept that we are being exploited. Our internal divisions are being exploited, re-amplified, the histories that we moved on from for geopolitical purposes. Because why the United States is angry, and particularly Israel, South Africa, for doing something legitimate, which was confronting Israel for genocide at the International Court of Justice.
I want to go back just for a second on the Nazi salute you mentioned. Steve Bannon, I saw a clip yesterday. Steve Bannon, he gave, he did the salute. They say it's a Roman salute, but I think it's intentionally ambiguous. And, even James Lindsay on Twitter X was saying this is stupid now. Like, why are we doing, being ambiguous and doing this sort of thing? Do you think that these PayPal tech South African guys, I think in my mind, I view them as totalitarians. They want to implement.
So here's the thing about Musk. Let me tell you Musk's grandfather. Musk's grandfather was a man by the name of Halderman. He was a Canadian who was the founder of Technocracy. He came to South Africa. He was a dedicated Nazi. Okay. I spoke to a friend of mine. I'm from Pretoria, grew up not very close to him. Elon Musk's mother, by the way, on TV sounds like my mother, the same accent. So they grew up in the exact same suburb area. I know where that area comes from. Spoken to an old friend of mine who was a brother 25 years older than him. He's one of those kids. And he said to me the Musk's families were weird at the time. They had seminars at their home about the Illuminatis and things of this way. Yeah, this is crazy stuff. Okay. So there's already something not right with the head of what went into Musk Inc. Okay. And you can see the technocracy strain very strong in Musk. I interviewed Patrick Wood, it was a few years ago now, on Technocracy, and I read this, Elon Musk, Calderman, and then I read the Afrikaans newspaper on Musk's family. Elon Musk's grandfather, and this is in the, what is this, Transvaal, which is an old Afrikaans newspaper. You can still find it on the internet, and you can get translations now. I love the fact that old newspapers are available. His grandfather wanted to search for the lost kingdom of the Kalahari Desert, which was a South African version of El Dorado. Okay, this is weird stuff. Okay, these are weird people that went into the making of this person, and you can see the way he's acting is a very strange person. So I'm very skeptical about him. He looks like a dodgy figure. And yeah, I like the fact he's South African, but if he was really South African, he would not go against his own country from birth, right? He would be South African American. There's no reason to have a contradiction in it. And at the moment, he is basically executing policies that's actively attacking the South African government. And trust me, South Africans, even white South Africans, will not love him for that.
And just to note again on I think there are overlaps between technocracy, obviously, fascism, Nazism. Yeah. There are clear sort of overlaps there. And there's just like a 1% of listeners who are openly pro-Nazi. And I have to repeat again, my view, there's nothing good about Hitler or Nazism. I found primary source material where he calls, I'm a 100% Slav, and they called Slavs Untermensch. And there's the occult strain, Hitler, there was forces behind Hitler, which were evil, sinister, occult. Mark Passio did a 4-hour talk on, he's not who people think he is, and is not somebody to look up to. Whatever, qualms people have with the, Jewish or Zionist question, the grass is not greener on the other side with Adolf Hitler
you can make a basic statement. Hitler committed genocide. Benjamin Netanyahu is committing genocide, and that doesn't make me anti-German or pro-Jewish or whatever the hell it is. It's just these are people killing people for. I believe both of them actually followed the religious cause. The Nazism was a cult of a sort. Okay, and then whatever. You're not going to find me supporting any totalitarian system. And Musk has got very strong totalitarian streaks in him. You see it with the way he manages Tesla. I mean, there's a good interview that was done by a man by the name of Nathan Robinson in Current Affairs, a left-wing magazine in the US, on how Musk actually manages Tesla and how many pyramid schemes and scams this guy's have had. Okay, so there's a lot of veneer of too good to be true around the guy, to me. I mean, sure, he's got achievements. He sent people, but he did a lot with government subsidies as well. Ironically, he wants to make it more efficient, but I'm sure he's not going to kick off his government subsidies. So there's a lot of things about this oak that does not tie up with me. Okay.
And you mentioned Patrick Wood, and he just posted something I shared the other day, which I think is important and related. He mentions Curtis Yarvin, which people are now beginning to think about, who's sort of this like ideological figure in the PayPal Mafia space. And Patrick titled the article "The Pied Piper Behind the Tech Bros' Intended Destruction of America." And just the excerpt that I posted, he says, Yarvin calls the administrative state the cathedral, roughly analogous to the deep state or the swamp. He wants to destroy democracy and supplant it with a corporate-like structure with a monarch calling the shots. Yarvin's neo-cameralism is a system originally proposed by him and inspired by Prussian cameralism, in which a state is a business which owns a country. And basically, it's like these guys want to do Age of Empires or Sims, where every patch of land is going to become sort of like a corporate private entity. And there are even people in the alternative media space spinning this off as good things.
Yeah.
And they're saying, let's get away from nation states and let's do cyber states, network states. And I'm thinking like, but you're gonna give up.
Look, I don't know what to make of it yet. I have not been able to read personally Elon Musk's ideology. It doesn't seem to me to have like consistent ideology. He seems to be an honest autocrat, which is what you should be scared of, right? You not be scared of the liars. He actually means what he says, and this is very dangerous to me. Is a optimal? Should much of the civil service and much of the waste in the United States be cut and optimized? Yes, I'm all for that. Do I want Elon Musk to run the whole show? No. And he basically bought the government. I mean, many millionaires, take Sheldon Adelson and his wife, Mary Manson, okay, who gave money to Trump for his election, who funds the media in Israel. Okay, that's obvious where that money comes from. But, even the Israeli lobby was a little bit more modest about their achievement. They were like, you're going to run the show, but we just give you money. Okay, so we remind you every now and then, and maybe if you do something dodgy, we remind you that we helped you with Epstein's jet plane as well. Okay, that's sort of what they were doing. With Musk, he just bought the government and he's running the show. He's basically sitting in the office and saying, "Oh, guys, this is how it's going to be done. This is how it is. This is more efficient." The challenge he's going to face, this is what I suspect, is he hasn't read Hayek, or at least he hasn't understood Hayek, is a central system of authority, no matter its intelligence, cannot compete against a market and price mechanism. So you're going to find inefficiency somewhere. You're going to find rebound effects. You're going to find price fluctuations, and we're seeing it already. He fired the guys are running the nuclear weapons arsenal. And what happens? Oh, you can't just optimize a system where it takes 10 years to train people. The nuclear industry awards people for the longer they're in the system because they need deep and complex knowledge. You want to just fire them because that's an inefficient management system? Oh, now you have to rehire them at a higher price. Now you've increased the market wages of all the nuclear industry. You're going to push up prices. So I'm waiting to see all of these unintended consequences hit him in the face. And then the other thing I've got news for him is they are threatening South Africa with Ramaphosa and the ANC. Now, whatever you think of the ANC, they know how to negotiate with Western power. South Africa's always had a foreign policy of strategic ambiguity, neither East nor West. Okay, so we lock them into negotiation, very similar to Indians one, while the dedication is actually to development of Africa. And what the ANC will probably do, what I suspect, they'll send 3 to 4 delegations with 3-4 teams that are totally different in their opinion to the United States to confuse the hell out of them. They know how to negotiate with the Europeans. So I'm waiting to see whether Trump's threats and his provocations is going to work against a leadership who runs a country where the only way to run it is to manage conflicts differently, or run it like a mafia, which is what our previous president did. That's going to be an interesting geopolitical test for me.
And just on the inefficiencies again, that was one of the criticisms. Again, I was reading somewhere yesterday, I don't remember where, on just on Curtis Jarvin's vision, which again overlaps with Musk and all these guys' hacks, that he thinks he's going to eliminate inefficiencies, but he's not. He's just going to create new ones. And it's funny. I mean, you work in the industry, but I posted that article yesterday on my feeds from Futurism, talking about how U.S. government fires specialists without realizing they were in charge of nuclear bombs, then panics and tries to rehire them, which is absolute insanity. I'm wondering, just any further thoughts on U.S. South Africa? And one trend I'm beginning to see. I picked up the book yesterday. Catherine Austin Fitz mentioned it, The Palestine Laboratory by Anthony Lowenstein. And you see what they're doing now is they're gaining power, control, and in more and more jurisdictions, they're rolling out these 15-minute, smart cities. The UK is heavily experiencing that. In Mexico, slowly, they're starting to push these policies in the big cities, right? Mexico City, where I am. Obviously, Gaza is a prototype for that. That's being then exported to the rest of the world. Do you think they might try? One of their goals is to start that process in South Africa. I'm sure already
Well, that's Rapport, the president, at one stage last year said we want to have a smart city close to Krugersdorp, which is one of our towns, and we reminded him at that point in time South Africa still had rolling blackouts. So how are you going to make this work if you need electricity for your smart city? I mean, I said this before on your show. I don't doubt the fact that there are people trying to push this type of crazy measure everything type of economy. I don't believe it's going to work, because I think one of the most powerful insights in economics comes from Hayek's and from the price mechanism. prices fluctuate, prices are spontaneous, markets have creative structure, and no statistical model, no supercomputer, no big data collection, all these kind of nonsense stuff can predict that. So I'm seeing so many unintended consequences. And I'll give you a good example. I stay in a small town in France, and they were trying this stuff. They were trying to implement walkable cities, which sounds great. I mean, that's not even smart yet, right? And they realized, oh, when we did that, we closed down all the stores, and they backtracked on it, because when you start doing that, people actually like to drive to their store to buy their stuff, and now they have to walk. And that's great maybe for a few people on a Sunday, but it's actually not great. So now they have to backtrack, and it's 1 or 2 days a week. So already the idea is falling on its face, for example. And I see there's so many of these examples that I think is going to happen. I'm waiting for thieves to realize, we should encourage them, that there's copper in these electrical cables, and copper has value. Okay, so try and implement a smart city in South Africa, in Johannesburg, where our utility company has to cast the copper in concrete, and the people still get it out. I don't know how they do it. And good luck is all that I'm saying to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think I may have experienced that, whether I was traveling or in terms of the groceries. Like, how are you going to buy that many groceries, walking, taking them back, or you have to go multiple times to the store?
It's more than the car. This is what I don't get. Now, Joe Cotton wrote about this. He's been fighting this battle for the last 30, 50 years. By the way, these things are not new. It's just new, old ideas being repackaged. It didn't work. It's not going to work, right? And one of the greatest inventions in the last century was the car. Why? Because you protect it against the weather. It's great to go and walk outside, but now if you have kids and you have to go shopping and it's raining, that's not a fun experience. You'd rather take your car. Okay, so the car is here to stay, accept it. And I think actually it's an attack on the car, because a car is individual freedom. It's a car, that type of type. I mean, they're even trying electric cars when they want to track you and stuff like that. But yeah, so I think the car is what we need to actually defend in this whole thing against smart cities.
And boy, let me tell you, I mean, my experience is living in northern Kazakhstan with every winter I fell flat on my back at least once because the ground is frozen. Mm-hmm. And the experience of going to the grocery store and having to walk like, a good while, half hour with full load of groceries, trying not to fall. And I didn't
that's how we got food and hunt together at times, right? Why do you want to go back? I like walking. I mean, I actually go walk and buy groceries. I've tried because I stay a kilometer away from the grocery store. Okay, that's great for me. I know most people can't do it, and there's stairs now, and it's also getting a bit more complicated. And I'm like, let's just rather take the car on Sundays. So this is the problem.
And I was on a 9th floor apartment, and sometimes I'd walk 9 floors with groceries because the elevator didn't work or it was always full. But let me ask you about. I've briefly read some stuff on the social media in the past days or weeks about Julius Malema. He might come to power, and if he comes
he
to
won't.
Power,
Julius Malema is the third largest party, but he's less than 7%. He's shown the elections as fallen. A friend of mine actually was the one guy who I invited at the interview with him. Mark Oppenheim was the lawyer who asked him, "Can you rule out the genocide of white people?" And he said, "I can't do it." So yes, he is a racist, supremacist guy that wants to commit genocide, but the black population in large have continuously voted against that type of radicalism in South Africa, because guess what? Most people are decent. Okay. But he has some following. He's a bit of a bullshitter. I don't know how else to say it, because he claims to be for the poor people. Then he takes a holiday to Spain and he drives. He's got Gucci bags. And so, people have seen through him, and the media has seen through him as well. And the only thing is, if the US is going to sanction him and sanction South Africa, you make it probably more likely that he will get more support. But if you just leave them alone, the people will sort him out. And, every country's got a crazy person like that.
What you said is making sense. I find it's hard to keep up for a sustained period radical ideas from the populace, because it just seems like most people just want to focus on having a decent living and getting along. And as time goes on, they become less interested in radical politics.
I'm interviewed on South African TV at least every week or 2 weeks, and the majority of the people who interview me are black South Africans. It's a black-owned channel that sometimes interview me for my expertise on energy. Nobody has ever called for the killing of me. They appreciate it. Okay. So I just don't buy that. I just, the experience I've had personally and the people I know and my mothers and brothers and whoever works in the country, they don't have that experience that people are threatening and killing each other every single minute. That's complete garbage. Yes, there is a lot of crime in the country, but we also have a lot of unemployment. Hello, that's going to happen. And there's a lot of issues. We have lack of policing, there's lack of systems, but I don't believe that the majority of people in the country are going to go to that level of indecency. But you only make it more likely if you're going to sanction the country, right? If you're going to act like Trump and Musk is acting, which is why I'd like to ask them to stop doing it. And if Elon Musk is not a truly dedicated Nazi and what we think about the papal mafia, maybe they don't represent the views of their parents, then they wouldn't actively lobby against South Africa. But at the moment, as South African, it looks to me like they're doing that.
Any other thoughts? I have a few other questions on some other topics like energy, but anything else that's interesting when it comes to South Africa, US, and whatnot?
No, it's just South Africa is now going to send delegations to the United States, and we'll see how the response is. The United States has not responded to our foreign minister yet, which is again a lack of respect. And South Africans actually cooperate a lot with the US. We work together. I don't have any reason to hate America or things of that. So, I just don't want this to happen. And for what it's worth, we're both democracies. I know the US doesn't always care about that. Neither do we, to be honest. But, there's something to that. So if there's a really big diplomatic dispute, people should negotiate about it. And they should talk about it. But, I think there's an artificial dispute being created because the biggest dispute is the fact that the South African government will not back down, okay, on Israel and Palestine. Why? Because since Nelson Mandela's time, they've been consistent on one thing, which is the Palestinians. And many white South Africans don't get it. I wrote an article last year about the propaganda and amplification and stuff. The ANC is also being alleged they're getting money from Iran. It's complete nonsense. That story was made up by this local South African Israeli lobby. Okay, they spread it online. The ANC's media publication, they run a publication, ANC Weekly, which I read regularly to get the views of their viewers. It's like their foreign affairs type of thing. So even before the thing got really bad in Gaza, was already calling for helping the Palestinians, where their own members wrote articles and poems in support of the Palestinians. So the support for Palestine is very deep in South Africa. And yeah, they're not going to break the government on that. They would rather be a hardline bunker state before it. So the US, whatever your view is on Israel, you should drop that issue. And I don't know if Trump's going to do that.
Let me ask you, on Trump, just any thoughts on Trump 2.0, this Trump presidency?
Yeah, I'd say the best way to deal with Trump is to do what Malcolm Turnbull in Australia did. He's the guy who summed them up very quickly, sized them up. He said to them, okay, you think you can make a better deal? Come and make a deal. Show me where the deal is. You are the deal maker, aren't you? And guess what? Australia has one of the best trade deals with the United States. He couldn't make a deal, and it blew up in his face. And he just moved on to another place. So the way to respond to Trump is to say, like, I don't know if you saw the wrestling he did years ago, where you can't make a deal, you can't make a deal. He just bluffs. And all you do is call his bluff. Say, where's your deal? Show me your better deal. And then you realize he doesn't have a deal because I don't believe he actually understands geopolitics. I think he just likes threatening people. And threats, people sort of think, oh, this is a genius business strategy. In negotiations, threats work as long as you're prepared to use your leverage. But you throw away your leverage as you make threats because I'm telling you what I'm going to do. And if you're not prepared to back it up, you're just bluffing. You just lied to me. So it's not a very good negotiation strategy either. It's a much better strategy to eliminate threats than before than to make threats. So if you really preempt something, you can negotiate on the sidelines, which is what I would like to see. I would like to see actual deal making a threat and then telling Trudeau to come here and Mexico to do this and him to come that works until a certain point when people have figured you out. And then it's just noise. And I think that's going to happen.
I had the thought the other day, I think too often the commoners have this view that, oh, Trump made this decision on this or that. And you think about it, well, no, he didn't. Like, no single person has enough time in the day to know about all of these things. There are massive teams behind him,
yes,
and interests. And there can be, he made some decision yesterday about some topic. He had no idea about it. They told him what to say. Now he's just basically got to make the case for it because there's no way he can have in-depth knowledge about whatever it is. And so And some of these are agendas that go back a long time, like this idea of integrating Canada, USA, and Mexico, North American Union. That's been around for over a century in different forms, right? Club of Rome, Technocracy, 1930s, even the British elite before that have Thomas Jefferson at the founding said we need a United States of America. And so his job is with this secret team, to take from Fletcher Browdy's term, secret team, behind him. There's different topics with different teams, and they feed him stuff. And some of the stuff is his own, but the other stuff is just any thought on that. I think he's a salesman.
No, I think he's selling. He knows how to brand himself to people who are foolish enough to fall for his branding. I mean, let's look at the basics in this war in Ukraine. Everyone who watched it beforehand knew NATO expansion was one of the root causes of the crisis. I don't believe it's the only one. It's where I disagree with some people, but it's one of them. Okay. Here's the problem. We all knew it. And what is Trump doing? He's basically executing what most people are saying. And why is the United States doing it? It's not because of some genius strategy to negotiate with Putin and multipolarity and whatever. It's because of the fact that Ukraine has lost the war. It's a fact. They've lost the war. The army is basically at the brink of collapsing. And now it is in such a state that the United States has to be at the negotiation table because they know they've lost it's South Vietnam all over again. And by the way, this is what I think, if Israel continues what they're doing, what will eventually happen to Israel, is we know that the United States government spends a lot of time on propaganda and the media. And the reason is they're scared of public opinion. And when enough people within the United States wakes up to what the Israelis is doing, which is a genocide and extermination campaign against the Palestinians, I do believe the United States public will turn, and Israel is at risk of being in a similar situation as Ukraine, where the deal would just be made with Iran, whether Netanyahu likes it or not. Because as long as US policy remains committed to Israel, they can continue doing it. But if the US cuts off it, and what I would say on that is this, the reason why the United States does not want to admit Israel as nuclear weapons is because under existing American law, like the Symington agreements, all military aid to Israel must become suspended. So as soon as a US official admits they have nuclear weapons, it's game over for Israel. And we know they have it because they have it at the Mona. We have Mordecai Minucci, all these things. And I'd like people to start talking about it, to say Israel has weapons. Why aren't we acting? Why aren't we implementing US law? Okay, and then that will bring a better deal for the Palestinians.
Speaking of nuclear, you are an energy expert, and I just want to get your thoughts on what is most interesting for you in this space. Some of the stuff I've been reading, Robert Bryce, who's fantastic, who I've interviewed on my old TNT radio program. I'll have to get him on the podcast, but I follow his stuff, and he says the green transition seems to be failing, offshore wind and solar. And I've interviewed a nuclear Bitcoiner is his username on X. He's a Canadian nuclear expert, and he's talked about small modular reactors. So just on the energy front, which way?
So two things you said. I don't believe the energy transition is necessarily failing. First of all, we've been transitioning. It's sort of like things have been happening, and now we're claiming credit for it for a long time. Most Western countries have had a decline in CO2 since the 1990s. Okay, so even if you care about that issue, it's a non-issue to begin with for Western countries. The issue is China and India, and they're still developing, and they will increase their CO2, but at a reduced rate. And the reason is the excellent expansion of solar panels worldwide. That's why I disagree with Robert. He's blind to the evidence. Solar is blowing out the market, okay? And this is not to say I want a smart city. It's just the fact that everyone can put a solar panel on their roof now. It costs a few €1,000 or maybe a few hundred even. So that is dominating the market. Onshore wind is some of the cheapest electricity. Offshore is very expensive. And that's where I think Robert's criticism is valid. Nuclear power is only 9% of all electricity worldwide, and it is going down. Okay, it will be there. It will remain a niche because governments see it as a strategic investment. As for SMRs, I was at the Russian ship, the only SMR that is working and operating. And there's one in Russia, one in China. I was at that ship in Pevek. Russians have a competitive product, and so does China. We don't know what they cost yet because the books in any of these companies are, you cannot trust them. But they are selling it to the world. Western countries are lagging behind, and we are 10 to 15 years behind them. So I think part of the BRICS and part of the animosity in what this geopolitics is about is the inability to accept that Russia and China and even Iran, because Iran will be the first country to build SMRs en masse, by the way. They've got them in production. There's more evidence that Iran has a nuclear reactor program on than a nuclear weapons program. Okay. Anyway, so that's happening in the nuclear space where the Eastern countries are now outperforming us with the plausible exception of France, which France still invests into nuclear. And that, I think, is a very bitter pill for the pride of Westerners to swallow, that they're even beating us in science and technology because we underinvested in those things for a long time. We neglected it. And, so that's sort of where I see the thing is happening at the moment. There's space in the nuclear industry, but I do believe it will need government support for a long time. And if you're against government support as a principle, then, I still haven't seen a business case for nuclear in the private sector, including SMRs.
And going forward, just any thoughts maybe in the West, what will energy use consumption look like, whether it's, gasoline, electrification? Will there be energy blackouts in the West? Will things continue as they are? Will they improve?
No, there's no evidence of blackouts because we have competitive markets, and if blackouts occur, prices go up and prices recollect themselves. Okay, that's the point of energy markets. Most Western countries are now installing solar panels en masse, so that transition is happening. Okay, that's just one of those things. And again, this doesn't make me a believer in climate and anything. It's just the fact that people have it, right? Even in France, nuclear is decreasing en masse. I still believe the energy, the transition fuel, as it's called, is natural gas. Why? Because whenever there's a slack in the system, there will be natural gas. And this, by the way, is a major geopolitical shift because it means that the importance of the Middle East for its oil is becoming less and less. So one of the biggest areas in the world where there is an actual transition happening is the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, these countries are electrifying with solar panels en masse. Okay, and that is a new game changer where the geopolitical importance of the Middle East might be diminished in time to come. And you can go and look, there's an old strategy in the US called the Pickens Plan. You say previously, it's old ideas that's now being implemented. The Pickens Plan was basically the wind corridor in Texas with lots of solar and wind. And some of the greenest states, let your listeners understand it, are Republican states in the United States. And green energy is not a danger to your threat, to your standards of living. Okay, it's not a conspiracy. Well, I believe in conspiracies anyways, but that's not a bad thing. What is bad is that people try and price electricity and control you through electricity. But I do think with the technological innovation that's occurred, that energy is now so abundant that it might become less political.
Yeah, that is, even here in Mexico, solar is picking up. I'm seeing more and more EVs in Mexico, Teslas. I've seen Cybertrucks, and most of these people have to get solar to power that stuff or be very
solar is the game changer of solar is it's off grid. It's not really off grid because you still feed into the grid. You still need a backup, and in most countries, you probably still need natural gas and coal in the traditional utility sense to back up for when there's really no sun and no wind. Okay, and then the argument they always say is, what if there's no wind and no sun? And that argument is the total system cost of electricity. It's very difficult to determine because you need in-depth knowledge of the entire country. Yeah, so there's a lot of debate as to what best mix and system is. I believe in markets, generally speaking. Okay, but I do make a case that the nuclear still be part of the mix because it's a strategic investment for countries. Why? South Africa has one nuclear reactor, Coburg in Cape Town. It's about 10-15%. No, it's 5-6% now of our electricity supply. It's very small. But it allows us to be at the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, and it allows us to do inspections in Iran, and I actually think we should insist on inspections in Israel. So it allows us leverage in international institutions. And that's why many countries are doing it. So Egypt is building a nuclear reactor. Why are they doing it? UAE is going to build one, or they're thinking UAE is one build one. Saudi Arabia is thinking of building one. Iraq is thinking of building one. Why are these countries building reactors? Because it is a geopolitical strategy of strategic ambiguity. If you have a nuclear reactor going, it's not with intent, and intent is important here. It's not that many steps to a nuclear bomb. Okay, you need to avoid inspections. If you do it under the IAEA inspections, like South Africa is now doing, it's almost impossible for a nuclear weapon. Okay? But they are saying, if Israel does not stop its nuclear weapons program or open up for inspections, we can see an arms race in the Middle East. And it will not just be Iran's nuclear weapon, by the way, which doesn't exist for what it's worth. It's a deception by Mossad. It will be an arms race in the Middle East. So we're seeing the nuclear diplomacy at play. And I find that quite interesting as somebody who's into nuclear and geopolitics.
And any thought on what you mentioned, gas, whether one of the interests in Gaza is, energy, the Leviathan, or there's documents that go back to the 60s where they discuss nuking Gaza to make way for Ben Gurion Canal. Just any thoughts on energy and
well,
Gaza?
there is gas offshore in Gaza, for example. I'm very skeptical of state-planned gas systems. Some of Gazprom's investments look very funny to me, for example. For example, the Nord Stream pipeline everyone goes on about was never really profitable. I wrote an article before it was destroyed, how, well, this is a bad investment. Okay. And then the thing happened, and I thought, crazy, like, what's happening? So there's a lot of arguments, that this is a valuable gas. There's not a lot of gas in Gaza, to be honest. It won't. Gas LNG is one of the best examples of a free market. And you can go and look at the BP World Energy Report. They show all the countries into it. There's something like 32 countries trading in natural gas, and private sectors and government all competitive. So it's an incredibly competitive product, and there's no OPEC. So there's no monopoly that can hog and manipulate prices. So will the gas in Gaza influence it? No. I think Gaza is very simple to me. It's a deliberate policy of ethnic cleansing because the Israeli leadership, the Zionist leadership, if you will, has never had a vision that includes respect for the Palestinians. They've always either seen them as subhuman or sub-native, or they just shouldn't even be there because they have a very warped vision that says they were never there to begin with. So I think that's just what it's about. They want to clean this place, and it's any excuse to do so, whether it's gas, whether it's Ben Gurion Canal, whether it's Trump's luxury state, things of that nature. I don't think the details matter. I think what matters is that the Palestinians are being killed because Israelis don't want to accept that they can actually extend full civil rights to all of them.
Yeah, I mean, my vision was always, I thought, why not just give the Palestinians their equal citizenship rights, and everyone's happy, but no. And I find it offensive, this term that Con Inc. now, Conservative Inc. is using what do they say? Gaza a Lago or Mar a Gaza. Absurd. Well, we've covered a lot, Hügo, a lot for people to digest, and I like going with my podcast, going around the world. We talked about Mexico recently, South Africa, and so any final thought for us, or if you want to let us know best places to find you.
Yeah, no, I think I've said everything I need to be saying. To say I'm following the South African one closely and the Iranian issue closely, so that's the only two on my radar. But I like your show. I'm on Substack. I write from time to time subscribers. I'd like to get a bit of a donation, if I don't mind asking people for that. If they like views, if they don't like me, please give me more money. If they like me a little bit, and yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate this.
Yeah, at the very least, just subscribe to Hügo on X and his YouTube and Substack, and he has some high level, excellent guests. If people just go, you had Dave DeCamp on, I saw not long ago, who I'm very familiar with. I've interviewed him. You've had Chomsky on, a whole host of folks. So yeah, thank you as always, Hügo.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.